Hi. I know what you're thinking. Where's the splash screen? Where's the theme song? What's going on? Never fear. I wanted to do this cold open quick. Had a couple of technical problems with the Netcast. So when you listen to it in the first few minutes, there's going to be a couple of little hiccups, but don't fear. Listener or viewer of the Netcast, after about minute 7, it's all good. But there are a couple of little hitches as I get things worked out. But I just want to let you know so you wouldn't be taken aback by it. So thanks and enjoy the Netcast. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint Netcast number. My notes say 176, must be 176, recorded live Monday, November 4th, 2013. I am your host, Todd Klindt, and of course I would be nothing without the love and support, the wind beneath my wings, the folks at Rackspace. They did it all. So I got the cup, I got the, oddly not the shirt, though you would think it is Rackspace red, but they did not supply that. I bought that one all on my own. But they got all kinds of cool stuff at sharepoint.rackspace.com. If you're not already friending us, you can go to facebook.com and go to /SharePoint at Rackspace. That's us too. You can go there, leave comments, tell us how great we are and how much you don't like Shane, that kind of stuff. But we've got all that. You can go out there, and the more things that the more people that click on that, the better they think the show is doing, the more likely they are to send me more flags or whatever. So hook a brother up and go to sharepoint.rackspace.com. Okay, for production notes, last week's Netcast 175 was a little slow getting out. I think I got it out this weekend, and that's because I was traveling last week, and so just didn't take it with me. I only traveled with my tablet, so I didn't even have the ability to do it on the road. So I got that done, and I think, now that I think about it, I don't think I updated the RSS feed, so I apologize to all of you guys that use that. I need to update that. And I think I'm going to juggle those around a little bit, because now I've got 3 feeds. I've got an audio feed, an iPod feed, and a Windows feed, but the Windows and the iPod video are the same. So I think I'm probably just going to have an audio feed and a video feed, and then just kind of combine those. So look forward to that. If you are using the RSS bit, I'm probably going to be juggling those around, but the RSS feed has the ability to send a forward thing, so I'll set that all up. But there will be some changes coming with that. As always, though, the quickest way to get this, the easiest thing for me, is when I upload them to YouTube. So you can go to youtube.com/ToddKlindtNetcast, and that'll always be the first place that they show up. And once again, that whole being on YouTube thing is all part of when I went to the New Media Expo last year, NMX. And like I said last week, I'll be going again next year, so hopefully I'll get one good idea out of that, and it'll be you guys will be able to benefit from all that. Okay, so for the topics tonight, are going to be a little lean. I normally do my show prep right before the show. I tried to get ambitious and do something else, and everything ended up in flames. But we'll save that. That'll be the big finale. I'm building towards that. So kind of some crazy topics tonight, but stick with me on that. First thing I wanted to mention is last week, after I got done with this Netcast, I went right to bed, got up bright and early the next morning, and flew out to Houston, and went to a SharePoint event down there. And it was great because one of the people who was in the Netcast the night before ended up being in Houston at the event that I was at the next day, and so that was pretty fun talking to some folks. So shout out to Trevor there. So that was a good time. But went out there, got to do some stuff. Rackspace had an event in Houston, and then we went out afterwards and had a SharePoint and all that. It was a good time, but it's always fun meeting folks that and I said Trevor, I meant Troy. It's always good, meeting folks, getting feedback about the Netcast, and he was in the chat room last week chatting up, so that was always good. I like to do that. So I was gone for a couple of days with that, and then I came back. Let me continue. Just a second. Getting audio. But then the day after I got back, I had a special visitor on Halloween, so I had to make sure I was back by Halloween. On Halloween, I had a special guest here in the studios. Lori Gowan, our official timekeeper and longtime fan of the show. She may have been here since episode 1. Spent a bunch of the day here on Thursday, and she got to come to the studio. She got to sit in the chair. She got to see how everything was put together, and with all the baling wire and the masking tape and the bubble gum and all that. So that was just kind of fun, showing how all that worked. And it was always good to see Lori. Lori's a good friend of mine, so it was very fortuitous that she was in our neck of the woods. But I think that is the first time that a viewer has been to the studio, so that was pretty fun. And talking about that, so Lori has been here for 176 episodes, give or take, and it was funny showing her because I filmed this thing in 4 locations in my house, and this one has been the longest, obviously, but I filmed it in my basement for a while, and then I filmed it upstairs in one location for a while, and then I moved it to the evenings and filmed it in another location, and then finally moved down here. And it was funny. So one of the funny things, when my wife and I moved to this house, in the basement, the previous family that lived here, the husband had made like an office in the basement, and the basement wasn't finished at all, so it was all concrete block and all that. So they had hung up some cable and had like a sheet that he could wrap around one corner of the basement to make it kind of an office. So when I first started this thing, you know, I'd watched other netcasts and kind of had an idea, and I knew that I had to have a decent background of some sort, and really the only place in the house that I had anything that looked decent was this sheet that this other family had there. So that's where I ended up setting this up. So I just set up a card table, had my laptop on the card table, had the camera facing me with the curtain behind me, and that's where I recorded my first couple of netcasts. Just, and I was wearing a crazy headphone and all that because I didn't have this fancy mic or that kind of stuff. But one thing I hadn't thought about when I started recording my netcast there, I mean, the location was as good as I was going to get at the time in my house, but it was about, we'll say, 6 feet as the crow flies from our cat box. Hadn't even considered that. And so if you go back to one of the earlier netcasts, there is a spot where one of the cats, something about the soothing sound of my voice made that cat need to use the cat box while I was broadcasting and recording. And then off to the side, a couple feet was our furnace. That was a vintage 1976 furnace. And you'll remember I started this netcast in March. Still gets a little chilly here in March. And so in one of them, the furnace kicked in and rattled the whole house because it was just, I just imagine when that thing kicked in, this huge fireball coming out of its bowels and all that. So it was fun showing Lori where all that was, and I'm like, oh, here's the table. Cat box was in the same place. Furnace used to be there. So it was funny, and it was kind of funny. I kind of gave her a guided tour because I'm like, okay, so I realized this location wasn't very good because of the sound and the other. So then I took her, like, I used to do it against this wall, and that worked pretty well, and then I used to do it, and she's like, well, you used to do it one place, so I had to show her how we used to have her furniture. So it was kind of fun because she has been here for the last, I've been doing this thing for almost 5 years now. So that was fun. So I'm glad she came up. I noticed in the chat room we've got some people talking about a road trip. Absolutely, come on up here. I would have bought Lori lunch, but she demanded that she pay first. But yeah, if you come up here, I'll buy you lunch, and it'll be fun. It was too bad that it didn't work out that she was here on a Thursday night instead of a Monday night, or else I'd have gotten her on stage, and it was a good time. So thanks to Lori for coming up. Thanks to Lori for taking notes and all that, which will be very important tonight as my video is all screwed up, and Lord only knows what's going on with that. But that was a good time. So that was two things in the last week. I got to hang out with some folks. There were a bunch of SharePoint Saturday events going on, and I swear everybody that I talked to in Houston was either going to SharePoint Saturday Dallas or SharePoint Saturday Chicago, and I missed out on both of them. And so it was good to kind of talk to some of my pals, even though I was missing out on the good events. So thanks to you guys for that. The next topic, we've got the scripting wife in the chat room, so this one seems fairly good, well-timed. Last week I talked about how I had a blog post on the measure commandlet in PowerShell and how you could use that to measure how long something took to run. And so as I was poking around again, I told you we have this PowerShell Friday thing at work. And so, Thursday night before I went to bed, I was thinking, oh God, what are we going to talk about Friday morning for PowerShell Friday? And then I remembered that measure command, again, all your PowerShell commandlets, PowerShell, much like share, only goes by one name, but it really has a full name. And its full name is Windows PowerShell. And that lets us know that it's owned by the Windows group at Microsoft. So any Microsoft product that puts out PowerShell commandlets has to adhere to certain rules. And some of those rules are things like they have to be verb-noun. The noun has to be singular, which I think is brilliant. And I'll give Jeff Snover personal credit for that. I don't know if he had anything to do with it or not. But all of the nouns are always singular, so you never have to try to remember what it is. And the verbs can only be approved verbs, which is great because you can have verbs that are synonyms and you're like, I don't know what it is. The PowerShell team blesses individual verbs, and any commandlet that comes with a Microsoft product has to use those verbs. So we talked about measure command last week. There is one other commandlet in PowerShell 3 that has measure as a verb, and that's Measure-Object. And so I talked about that one on PowerShell Friday, and I've got a whole blog or a whole email that I sent out to the team that talked about it. But essentially, Measure-Object is used to count objects. And so you can throw it on the pipeline and do whatever, and you send it a collection of things and it will count them for you. Now, those of you who've been doing this PowerShell thing for a while are like, that's just not very impressive, because most objects or collections have a .count method, which obviously counts them. So that's true. You can do, you could do get SP site, pipe, Measure-Object and get the number of site collections, or you could do parenthesis, get SP site, parenthesis, .count and get the same number. But what the, and I'm sorry because the scripting wife in the chat room just said that her favorite commandlet was get lost. She uses that when the scripting guy a lot. I'm going to use that one. I normally use get out, but get lost works pretty well too. But what Measure-Object will let you do is it will also let you do some math on these things. Now, these are probably things that you could string together on your own, but why would you do it if there's already a commandlet? So for the SharePoint folks, the example that I gave was getting all your site collections, so get SP site -limit all, piping that through select object, grabbing the URL, and grabbing the storage used. So the site collection usage.storage properties, and then piping that through Measure-Object. It's going to give you the number of site collections, but then it's also going to give you the sum of all the storage and the maximums and the minimums. So that was kind of a fun one. As I started playing with Measure-Object and writing out my email, I thought about how I could do this with, what pertinent usage this would have with SharePoint. And that was the first one that came to mind was storage. So, but you can use it to count anything. It could be to count users. It can do whatever. But Measure-Object, as I mentioned in the email, it's the other measure brother of PowerShell. So I don't know if I'll blog that one or not. That's kind of a nice one to have out there, but I don't know if it's good enough to get its own blog post. But a fun one. And again, like I've said, this whole PowerShell Friday thing that we're doing at work has been fun because it's been making me investigate stuff. And I think I already know what I'm going to do for this week. I'm working on some PowerShell scripts for a customer and had to discover a couple things that are very applicable. And it was funny, one of the things somebody left a comment on my blog about today. So that's good. So that's foreshadowing for 177. I'm going to have a great PowerShell tip for you guys. Okay, so the next one, I'm going to be honest. I don't really completely understand all of this one, but I know some of my developer buddies were all getting their, I don't want to say their knickers in a twist, but they were all very excited about this. And this was a blog post that I saw from Paul Schaeflein, a friend of mine from Chicago. He's a developer, but he's a decent guy anyway, so I hang out with him when I get the chance. But he and some of his developer buddies were sitting around talking about how to destroy SharePoint farms or whatever developers do when they're not in the basement, not showering for days and developing. But they were talking about some REST endpoints that had been available on Office 365 for a while. So REST, if you remember, that's the web interface for getting into SharePoint and adding list items and all that kind of stuff. It's been around since SharePoint 2010. And it's one of those ways that like the client-side object model and those kind of things get into SharePoint. In 2013, it's more important because, you know, you've got SharePoint 2013 is trying to get you away from farm solutions and those kind of things. So these kind of things are better. And I pasted a link to this, and the developers in the chat room are going crazy. But anyway, so Paul and Andrew Connell, were a couple of the guys, were talking about this metadata endpoint that existed in Office 365 but didn't exist in on-premises SharePoint 2013 and how crappy it was. And someone in the room said, yeah, we're pretty sure that that is available in on-premises SharePoint, and I'm pretty sure that it snuck out in a cumulative update somewhere. So Paul, being the intrepid sleuth that he is, found a VM that had the March 2013 public update on it, though he calls it the cumulative update in his blog post. He's a developer. I give him a lot of latitude. And it didn't work for that. And so he was just going to download every cumulative update, apply it, and then test for this metadata endpoint. Well, luckily for Paul, it was the April. It was the very first cumulative update that had this in it. So he's got some screenshots. Fabian and Jeff in the chat room are all beside themselves excited about this. I don't imagine very many developers listen to this, but I did throw this out there, and I did update my builds list. So if you go to toddklindt.com/SP2013 builds and go to the notes, bugs, and regressions for the April 2013 cumulative update, you'll find a link to Paul's blog post and all the GUI data about whatever the hell this is that he's so excited about. So that's your time in the sun, Paul. I hope you appreciate it. But that leads me into the much cooler one that I wanted to talk about, and that is some new stuff that came into the October 2013 cumulative update. So the one that just came out here a couple weeks ago. And as I was reading through SharePoint documentation, as I am known to do, nights, weekends, holidays, all that kind of stuff, dim the lights a little bit, crack out the tablet, read through some SharePoint docs, I was reading through the software bounds and boundaries and limitations document, which is something that I always end up trotting out in front of customers because they always want to do some silly things with SharePoint. And they don't just trust me that it's a silly thing. I have to get it in black and white, and so always looking at that. But I noticed that that document had been updated recently. So I ran right out to the web to download it to see what it was that they changed. And it turns out that in the October 2013 cumulative update, so again, the one that just came out, search got a huge shot in the arm. A whole bunch of boundaries and limitations for search have been removed or increased dramatically with that cumulative update. And so I obviously don't need to explain why that's a good thing, but whenever I'm trying to, so I was talking to a customer last week, and they were talking about how to get SharePoint into their organization, how to win their organization over, because they had some folks that just weren't on the SharePoint bandwagon. And they said, well, we're going to do this. We're going to set up a team site. We're going to set up this other thing. And then we're just going to throw search in there, but we're not going to do much with it. And I said, well, yeah, I'm with you. We need to get them excited about SharePoint, but SharePoint search is exactly the way to do that. So all those other things that you're going to do, I think you should do half as much of that and spend that time on search instead, because search will just knock people's socks off if it's set up correctly. So that's why all these updates to search are such a big deal, because search is such a great part of SharePoint. So I'm not going to go through all of the things that this increased, but there are some notable ones that are easy to talk about. Before the October 2013 cumulative update, you could only have one index component on each server. Now you can have 4. So now if you've got beefy enough of a machine, you can have up to 4 index components on a box. You used to only be able to have 5 crawl databases per search service application, and they've upped that to 15 now, so 3 times as many. There used to be some limits on log entries, the crawl log. Now there's no limit. There used to be like 100 million or something. Now there's no limit to it whatsoever. Now you can have 25 index partitions per search service application. So that's that idea that you can split your partitions up against multiple machines, so that when users do queries, that workload gets spread out across all those machines to spread that load out. You used to be able to only do that across 20. Now you can do it across 25. And there used to be a limit for the number of documents in the index, or the corpus as they call it. Used to be 100 million, and that was and all of these before were tested limits. They weren't hard limits. So now, instead of being limited to 100 million items in your corpus, now you can have 10 million items per index partition. And we talked about that is 25, a limit of 25. So now you can have up to 250 million items if you scale things out. And all of those, and plus a whole lot more of that, is in the regular SharePoint boundaries and limitations document. And if you go to the search section, they've got it in there. And they've done a really good job where they've got the different values. And then off to the right, they say, if you have the October cumulative update, now it's this, so on and so forth. Jack in the chat room is asking, Todd, it used to be that you could only have one big search bucket. Is that still the same? I don't think that was ever the case. You could always have multiple search service applications. So SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint 2010, you could have multiple search service applications. And in SharePoint 2007, you could have multiple SSPs. So you could have multiple search that way. It didn't scale as well, because SharePoint 2007 just didn't scale as well. But I would say that it's probably a better idea to only have one search bucket. Now, if you want to do that crazy multi-tenant stuff, you can break search down into multi-tenant parts, so they can only crawl their own stuff, and you're not relying on just security trimming. But Jeff is asking, is it a good idea to make 2 partitions on a new farm to allow for easier growth? So the partitions are good for a scale point for speeding things up, and so this is, you can have mirrors and partitions. So partitions, again, so let's say you've got 1 million items in your index. So if you have one partition, you have one index file that has 1 million items worth of stuff in it. If you create a second partition, you would have 500,000 on one server and 500,000 on another server. And when a user does a query, they each go through their 500,000, report back to the query server, and it gives the results. So your question is whether you should start with that. You can. It's not tough to add that later on. No tougher than any of the other search modifications stuff is. You got to break your PowerShell out and clone your topology and all that kind of stuff. But if you do that, if you have multiple partitions, then you need to make sure that you have mirrors of those partitions, because if you've got 2 servers with a full copy of the index, if one server goes away, you're good to go. But if you split that up and they each have half, then if either goes away, the index is invalid, and you're faced to you get to do that index refresh or index reset in the full crawl. So if you do break your index files into partitions, make sure you have each partition mirrored in at least one spot. With 2 servers, it's tough to see the benefit of that, because for my example with 1 million, you split it in half, each one gets 500,000, but then they have to mirror the other 500,000, so they're back to having 1 million again. So it takes the same amount of space, but since they're working together on the queries, that's faster. But then when you add that 3rd server, that's when you really get your benefit, because then you just need to have one mirror of each. It's that whole, n+1 thing. But you can do it ahead of time if you want to, or you can do it down the road. I don't have a strong opinion either way, I guess. Something that you should plan for, though, if you think you're going to hit some of those boundaries. So that was good. And I guess that makes, there hasn't been a lot of big changes in SharePoint 2013. The cumulative updates haven't really added a lot, so I was glad to see a couple of those things trickle out. Still no word on the October 2013 version of the project server patches. The project team's still wrapping that one up, even though we're into November now. And the OWA patch, the patch itself is still there. The knowledge base article is not. So if you want to patch OWA, you have to do it without knowing what it is that you're patching. I'm not sure what the story is on that. And for all of these things, for the April 2013 cumulative update or the October, whatever, remember you have to have the March public update installed first. There is no scenario if you are on SharePoint 2013 RTM, there is no scenario, no amount of storytelling where you don't install the March 2013 public update. You have to. It's just how there is to it. So got that out of there. I've updated the April patch page. I have not updated the well, maybe I've updated the October patch page, but not April. But I'll get all those changes out there for you guys. All right, so for my final topic, and the one that has caused me so much heartache and sorrow this evening, I was able to procure a Surface Pro 2 tablet last week. So I don't know if you remember last week, my tale of woe. I wanted to buy a Surface Pro 2, but didn't want to do it before I sold my Surface Pro, because those Surface Pro 2s are sort of spendy, and I want my kids to go to college and all that, so I couldn't just fork that money out. But a week ago, last Thursday, so 10 days, 12 days, whatever ago, I sold my Surface Pro, was very excited, went online to buy myself a Surface Pro 2. They were sold out everywhere. Awesome timing on my part. But a friend of mine, Jeff Diverter, my boss's boss or whatever at Rackspace, was kind enough to go to the Microsoft store in San Antonio and buy me one, but the very last one of the model that I wanted. So I was able to get a Surface Pro 2. I got the 256 gigabyte version because it has 8 gig of RAM. And I want to use that as my daily driver. So I got the one with the 8 gig of RAM to make sure that that I could do that. So I was very excited. And so then it was like last Thursday or Friday, or a week ago, Thursday or Friday, the official Microsoft Surface dock, which they've been telling us would not be available till Q1 of next year, was available for about 7 minutes. But at that point, I didn't know if I was going to get the Surface Pro 2, so I didn't buy the dock. Well, of course it went on. I got my thing, and so I had to figure out something else to do. Now, I could have waited until those docks came back into stock to try to move that to move over to that as my daily driver, but I'm just not that patient. So myself and Shane got one of these little buggers too. We were looking at some of the third-party docks that are out there, and we discovered there's a lot of them out there that are cheaper than the Surface official Surface dock, though not nearly as sexy, because that thing is a beautiful piece of art. But are cheaper and probably more functional. And so I went with one of those. And so the one that I got, and we'll see how this shows up on the camera here. This is, the company name is Plugable. You can see that right there. You can see the chat room in the reflection there. And I got this one. It was a little over $100, something like that. I forget exactly how much it was. And it connects to the Surface through USB 3, so let's do this. So it connects there, and then just has scads and oodles of connections on it. So you can see from here it's got 4 USB 2 connections. It's got a gigabit Ethernet spot, whereas the official Microsoft dock only has 100 megabit. Man, that's like a can with 10 cans with string. That's just horrible. And then it's got a DVI output and HDMI output also. So I was able to hook it up to my 2 monitors. That all worked. I used some adapters, got that all working. And then on the front, it has 2 USB 3 adapters, and then headphones and microphone. So this little bugger hooked it right up when I got it on Friday. Worked like a champ. there were some drivers I had to install. Everything were great. Surface Pro, loved it. Had the Surface Pro on my 2 regular monitors on that, and then I've got a TV hanging on the wall. I hooked up to the Surface Pro itself. I was rocking. Started work today. Everything was great. Was loading lots of things on the old Surface Pro, and I'll get back to that in a second. And life was good. So then I kind of got a little cocky, and here's where it bit me. I said, I got this Netcast coming up, and I got USB 3 for my webcams. I got USB 2 for the fancy mic. It's got a faster processor. I'm going to do the Netcast on the Surface. So instead of preparing for the Netcast like I should have been, and that may come as a surprise to some of you who've watched the Netcast, but there is a fair amount of work that goes into this thing. Instead of doing all of that work that I should have been doing, instead of doing my homework, I was playing with my new toys. And so I installed the drivers for the microphone, got that thing all set up, configured, did some sound tests. It was all good. Everything was looking good. So then downloaded the Logitech drivers for my webcams, and I also used the Logitech software to record this thing. Got those out, all downloaded. Everything was great, and installed them and plugged the webcams in. And there was an earth-shattering kaboom, and I sort of looked like Wile E. Coyote. My hair was all streamed back, and I had like gunpowder smoke on my face and all that. My Surface Pro, as those Logitech drivers were installing, like the screens were flashing, and Windows was making that sound like it was uninstalling things, and devices were being unplugged. And normally when that happens, because you're installing stuff, you hear like the doo-doo, and then the doo-doo when it adds it back in. There was no doo-doo, no happy little doo-doo at the end. It was all just things being uninstalled and going away and monitors going dark and all that. So that got very scary for me. But the Logitech drivers suggested that they had installed maybe a little bit, told me the name of the webcam and all that. And so I thought, well, maybe just a cleansing reboot is all that I needed. So got that all done, did my cleansing reboot on my Surface. And the Surface reboots are very fast because it's all solid state. It's all that business. So it came back up, Surface, little wheelie deal, all that. Screen came up blue. The direct connect monitor popped in, and there it sat. I got no login, got no nothing. And so I sat there for a minute. I know that one of my flaws as a person is that I'm impatient. So I sat there patiently, waiting for the Surface to do its surfacey things. There were no surfacey things. So I expected that it was probably, USB whatever, and unplugged the USB 3 thing that connected me to this. And then my regular Surface monitor came up, and I could log in. So I logged in. Everything seemed fine. Okay. Plug it all back in, and got the happy sounds that things were going to be coming back up. Both my monitors, they do that thing where they power down and everything when there's no signal. They powered up, all the lights came up, but no pictures came up. It was all just blank. The Surface could see the monitors. It knew they were there. I could turn them on, all that kind of stuff, but I just couldn't get any pictures. They would light up and then just be black. So I fought with that for entirely too long. And then people started showing up in the chat room and all that, and I'm like, I should maybe come up with some stuff to talk about. And so here we are with tonight's thing. And then at the beginning, something got screwed up, and I think I'm going to have to splice together the online recording or something, or miss the first few minutes. So that is where that's at. Now, I uninstalled everything, uninstalled the Logitech drivers, uninstalled the microphone drivers, uninstalled it all, and it still doesn't work. So I don't know what I'm going to do. But that's hopefully by next week I'll have that all figured out, because I would love to just use the Surface Pro 2 for that. Other than that, been very happy with it. So one thing I did want to mention is that, so now I'm kind of having this thing have a split identity. It's sitting at my desk. It's my daily driver. It's got a power supply. It doesn't run on batteries. It's got huge monitors as far as the eye can see all over the place, so it doesn't have to worry about fitting things on a little screen. It's got a keyboard and a mouse connected to it, so it doesn't need to do, input things. It's got a 1 gigabit connection connected to it, so it doesn't need to throttle stuff. That's how I'm using it now. But my goal with this thing is that when I travel, like when I went to Houston last week or whatever, that I will travel with it, and it will have good battery life while I'm on the plane, because now I can use those things during takeoff. Love you, Delta. But then when I get there, it'll have lots of battery life. And so those are two conflicting profiles. So one of the things that I've been very thoughtful about is every time I install something, is it going to have something running in the background that's going to rob me of precious battery life? And so new in Windows 8 and 8.1, in the Task Manager, there's a tab called Startup, and that shows you the things that are set to start up at the beginning. So every time, like when I installed the Logitech thing, it installed two things that wanted to start up. It was some product registration BS and driver thing, and then some webcam software. All that stuff is great when I'm sitting at my desk. That's all fine, except for the whole 8 gig RAM thing. But when I travel, I don't want any of that stuff running, because I don't want that running while I'm on the plane. I don't want it taking any battery time. So every time I would install something, I would go into Task Manager and disable all that stuff. So if you've got a Windows 8 or 8.1 device and it's running slow or whatever, or if you've got an RT tablet or whatever, go into Task Manager, check that Startup tab, and just see all the crud that's loading up in there, and you might be able to pull some of that stuff out. And that's something I'm going to be very mindful of as I'm trying to move this thing in, because I love all the space I've got on my desk now with my laptop gone and my dock and all that. But hopefully next week I'll have that all figured out, and we'll be in good shape. Maybe next week won't be Surface Week, as Brian LaLansat mentioned in the chat room. I thought I would tell you all my tale of woe. And for those of you that don't travel a lot, last week was a big week. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, finally came out and said something that we've been telling them for a long time, and that's that electronics, things like Kindles and all that, can't actually crash planes when they're taking off or landing. And so FAA said, we're going to let airlines take that restriction away. They got to talk to us, but we'll do it. And JetBlue and Delta were part of the team that helped them design that. And so JetBlue and Delta late last week said, it's all good to go. So anybody who flew, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever this week, was able to read their Kindle from start to finish, which the amount of money that I will save buying magazines at the airport for that 7 to 10 minutes during takeoff and landing that I can't use my Kindle, the amount of money that I will save will more than pay for this Surface and any therapy that I need after trying to get it to work. So other airlines will be soon to follow, so you'll be able to use your Kindles and your small tablets and all that kind of stuff. Kind of the guidance that they've said is that if it's small enough to fit in the seat back pocket, which means 2 pounds-ish, then you can probably use it at takeoff. So that was good. I was happy to hear that. Of course, I got no more travel planned until January, but when I do travel in January, I'm going to love it. So, and since we're talking about me traveling and the places that I'm going to be, let's move on to the shameless self-promotion part of the Netcast. As always, you should be buying my book. If you haven't already, shame on you. Shame, shame. You're coming up on Christmas. I know it's a little early to be talking about that, but coming up on Christmas, my book makes a great Christmas present. Go to toddklindt.com/pro SP2013 admin. Buy a copy for your loved ones. Buy an extra copy for yourself. Now you can buy a copy on your Kindle and read it when you're taking off and landing and all that. So in the chat room, they're talking about phone calls. The FAA, I read the actual page, or I guess Delta, on Delta's page talking about this. They make it very clear that they will never allow phone calls. They say something like, and we've heard overwhelming from other passengers that phone calls should not be allowed. So hopefully that will not happen. That will be horrible if that ever comes to fruition. So we are less than a week now. We are 5 days away. Oh my goodness, I can't even hardly wait. This Saturday, I will have another blog post on the Hey Scripting Guy blog. So that will be 2 in my lifetime, which is at least 2 more than I deserve. So if you're not already going to the Hey Scripting Guy blog every day, that's Ed Wilson, the scripting guy at Microsoft. And he has guest scripting guys, and he's been kind enough now twice to take articles from me. So Saturday, have that ready in your browser, put it in your alarm clock and all that, so when you get up Saturday morning, you can go run right over and read that, because I know you're as excited about it as I am. So I'm very excited about that. That will be on the 9th at the Hey Scripting Guy blog. Thanks to Ed for that. So then in January, I'm going to be at the New Media Expo in Vegas. I talked about that a little bit last week. That is just a conference for new media. So things like blogs and netcasts like this and video shows and all that kind of stuff. So again, last year I picked up a bunch of things when I went to the New Media Expo. Lynn Dye is here in the chat room watching this thing live. Got to hang out with her a bunch. That was a good time. But things like having my YouTube channel is something that I got directly from there. And just lots of tips kind of got me things, got me more excited about things. So I'm going to be going back in January. This time I'm dragging Justin, our marketing guy. And so hopefully things like the SharePoint.rackspace.com page will benefit from it and all that. But I'll be going there in January. And then in March, there's this little thing in Vegas. Maybe you've heard of it, the SharePoint conference. And I'm going to be doing a pre-con at that. So the SharePoint conference itself is March 3rd through the 6th. And we're doing it March 2nd. That's going to be an all-day thing. Shane and I'll be installing SharePoint 2013 for you guys. Naomi in the chat room is asking, are you going to blog what you learn at the New Media Expo? I'm not opposed to it. I haven't in the past because I just imagine that nobody cares. But that's not a bad idea. I can do that. I struggle with what to put on my blog, but remind me more about that, Naomi, and we'll figure something out when January comes. So the pre-con, so you can sign up now. The SharePoint conference itself is about $2,000. Our pre-con is an extra $400 on top of that. Worth every penny, I promise. It's going to be a good time. We'll make it fun. If you've ever been to one of Shane and I's sessions, we try to keep people excited, get things excited. So that is March 2nd, and you can go to SharePointConference.com and find out more about that. Then the next month in April, I'm going to be at SP TechCon, and that is April 22nd through the 25th. And we'll be talking about some stuff. I don't know what sessions I'm going to be doing there, but I think they're going to let me go to that. They've let me go to all the ones before. Been very kind. So as you're trying to figure out your budgets and all that for next year, we got the SharePoint conference in March. We got SP TechCon in April, and I would be remiss if I didn't also mention Tech Ed. So Microsoft Tech Ed is going to be in Houston for North America, and that is going to be May 12th through the 15th in beautiful, sunny, humid Houston, Texas. And so I kind of mentioned that because if you're, again, trying to figure out your training budgets or your travel budgets, you've got SharePoint Conference in March, SP TechCon in April, and Tech Ed in May. So a lot of stuff going on. That's some of that stuff's even 6 months out, and there's just a whole bunch of things. Hopefully I'll be there. If you go to any of these events and I'm there, by all means come up and say, hey, had a bunch of people do it. I'm a pretty friendly guy, pretty easy to get along with. So if Rackspace has a booth, by all means stop by, or if you just see me in the hallway, whatever, come up, shake my hand, say, hey, would love to hear from you. So that is it for this week. I apologize for the light SharePoint content. I would have done more had I not had my nose buried in my new toy. But hopefully I'll be able to splice all this together and get a good netcast out of it. That's my hope. But thanks to everybody. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Todd Klindt. You can find me at toddklindt.com/blog. I'm on all that stuff. Had a couple people send me ideas for future netcasts. I'm looking at those. We'll cover those. But by all means, if you've got some suggestions, shout them out, and I'll see what I can do. Thanks to everybody, and you have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.